to reason. Will you open your eyes? It's a wonder what you'll find with an open mind. You may be surprised. Yeah, gotta get away from this illusion. For the sake of the world, this delusion. It's gotta go. Yeah.
Oh my, it's another episode of the Atheist Experience. I'm your host, Russell Glasser, and with me today is Jen Peeples.
Hi, how you doing?
Pretty good. Today is Sunday, July 3rd, 2011. We are a live call-in public access atheist television show based in Austin, Texas, dedicated to promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. We are also available through live streaming video at ustream.tv. The official Atheist Experience website is www.atheist-experience.com. The Atheist Experience is sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit organization which you can find at www.atheist-community.org. You can also provide feedback by commenting on the unofficial show blog, atheistexperience.blogspot.com, or email us at tv@atheist-community.org. Be sure to check out our other regular show, The Nonprofits, an audio-only podcast that is also available through the ACA website. If you enjoy the show today, please come and join us for dinner after the show, beginning around 6 at El Arroyo, 1624 West 5th Street here in Austin. Since it's never too early to start announcing the best event of the year, the annual ACA Bat Cruise will be taking place 3 months from now, October 1st, 2011. And that's all the announcements I have.
Okay. Well, actually, we have one more, and that was a request by email from Daniel in Bolivia. He wanted us to give a shout-out to the Bolivian Atheist Society. So if you're an atheist in Bolivia, please check them out. They're on Facebook, and you can find
Hey,
them up.
Bolivian atheists.
Yeah.
What's on your
Okay.
mind today, Jen?
Well, we've had a couple of interesting emails this week. We always get interesting email, but this is particularly interesting because I had one guy suggest after a brief exchange that perhaps I would find my faith in some way, and I pointed out to him that when you have evidence, you don't need faith. And so today I'm going to hopefully rob some people of their faith by using evidence to give them some answers. And this also addresses another viewer email that asks basically how do you use archaeological evidence and other historical evidence to basically disprove what's in the Bible. So first of all, I want to address that particular question in that we're not trying to actually disprove what's in the Bible. What we're trying to do is discover what's actually true and separate that from what's probably not true. So one of the things I want to do is use an example to illustrate how historians go about documenting whether something in the Bible is true or likely true or doubtful. And I'm going to use an example from 2 Kings, chapters 24 and 25, which describes the fall of Jerusalem and the subsequent Babylonian exile. Okay? So the questions that we have before us are, did these events actually happen? And if yes, is the account in the Bible a reasonably accurate account of the events? And how would we answer these questions? And the good news is that the Bible actually makes some testable claims in 2 Kings. So we can take a look at these and apply some standards of evidence to them and come up with an answer about whether they're true or likely true. And so the first thing that we see is that we've got actually 2 sieges of Jerusalem recorded in there. One supposedly took place around 598 BCE and the other around 587 BCE. These dates are approximate. Okay? And if we examine the records, one of the things that we would do, we talk about extra-biblical contemporary evidence. we could actually go back and look at the Babylonian records. One of the things that you do when you've got an alleged battle recorded is you go and look at what the other side says about the battle. And what we find is that these dates are, and the fact that these sieges did occur, is confirmed by the Babylonian records from before and after the events. And we don't actually have any good records for the second siege, but we've got records from before and after that sort of bracket that and actually document that this did occur. Second, we have the names of the Jewish kings, Jehoiakim and Zedekiah, and these are also confirmed by Babylonian records. Okay, and the fates of both kings that are recorded in 2 Kings is corroborated by the Babylonian records as well. So in the case of Jehoiakim, he was actually taken into captivity and held in prison, and Zedekiah met a particularly gruesome fate. He was actually forced to watch the execution of his sons, and then he was blinded and then taken in chains to captivity. And again, the Babylonian records confirm this. Okay. We also have the names of the Babylonian kings. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar and Amil Marduk. Okay, Amil Marduk is known as Evil Merodach in the Bible, and those names are actually on the list of Babylonian kings, and the dates of their reigns are in accord with the account in 2 Kings, which brings us to the timeline, because 2 Kings actually gives us a bit of a timeline here. According to this, Jehoiakim was taken captive in 598, roughly, by Nebuchadnezzar. And this was after the first siege of Jerusalem. Okay? And then it says that, if we go to the records, we find that Nebuchadnezzar actually reigned from 605 BCE to approximately 562 BCE. And that he took Jehoiakim into captivity in the 8th year of his reign, which would have been approximately 597. So basically the account's about a year off in here, but which is not too bad for that far back in history. Then 2 Kings chapter 25 verse 27 says Evil Merodach, which is again is Amil Marduk. He began his reign in the 37th year of Jehoiakim's captivity. So if we say 597 minus 37, that's 560 BCE. He actually began his reign in 562 BCE. So it's about 2 years off, but that's still roughly the same. You know, it's pretty accurate actually. Now the Babylonian records confirm that Nebuchadnezzar died in approximately 561, maybe 562 BCE. Okay, and he was succeeded by Amil Marduk. And then finally, there's a mention of an allowance given to Jehoiakim, because one of the things that is recorded in 2 Kings chapter 25, verse 30, it talks about an allowance given to Jehoiakim after he was released from captivity by Amil Marduk. In fact, there were clay tablets that were excavated in Babylon between 1899 and 1917 that contained descriptions of the rations given to Jehoiakim. So we have extra-biblical corroboration of the story that's recorded in 2 Kings.
Well, so it certainly seems like everything in the Bible must be true then, right?
Well, not exactly. Because one of the interesting things, one of the reasons this is kind of important, is that if you'll notice, 2 Kings refers to Amil Marduk, who we know did not ascend to the throne until after 561 or 562. So we know that portions of 2 Kings were edited after that date. They have to be. Okay. And this is important for a couple of reasons. First, it illustrates how we can validate these ancient events using contemporary extra-biblical records. So we've validated this as historical, and we've shown where there are a couple of things that we know about the timeline here, namely that some of these events were recorded after 561.
So
Okay.
when people say to us, oh, you just, discount everything in the Bible and nothing would get you to believe, it's important to point out that that's not true. We're
Exactly.
just asking for corroborating evidence. And then we find
Exactly.
an event like this where Nebuchadnezzar, I believe, is...
That's yeah. I'll talk about. Go ahead and make
Sorry,
your point.
am I
I'm gonna-
wrong to
no,
correct that?
No, that's right. But I'm going to make a point here about that in just a second. So,
Okay.
okay.
So when we find out that an event like this is backed up by independent historical evidence, being able to be verified by different sources, then, if it can be demonstrated, then that's the kind of thing we're inclined to accept as true.
That's correct.
Okay.
Now you mentioned Nebuchadnezzar, and you
Yes.
notice I use the pronunciation Nebuchadnezzar.
I did notice that a lot.
Okay. The reason for that is that there are portions of the Bible in 2 Kings and Jeremiah and some other places where you find the name of the king rendered as Nebuchadnezzar versus Nebuchadrezzar. Okay. The difference is that later on, a Greek editor came in and edited portions of it. And whenever you see the name Nebuchadnezzar used, that's evidence of a Greek editor coming in later during the Greek period and rewriting some of this. And it's a difference between the original form of the name and the Greek form of the
Okay.
name. So it's one of those historical anachronisms that's important for dating a passage and for identifying where it may have been edited by later
So
editors.
are you saying that sometimes the Hebrew R symbol appears and sometimes the Hebrew N symbol appears because it's been jacked with?
It's been edited by a later editor.
Okay.
Okay, so again, we're getting back to why this is important, and it's that, first of all, it demonstrates we don't arbitrarily reject what's in the Bible as not historical just because we don't want to believe it. This actually has some historical support. And the method that we use to validate this account would be largely accepted by most Christians out there. They'd say, yeah, sure, it just shows that, the Bible's true. However, this very same method that I just illustrated here can be used to show that other significant events recorded in the Bible almost certainly did not happen. Something like the flood, that's a pretty trivial example to use to debunk. Well, we've got geological evidence that shows that didn't happen. But other things like the Exodus and Joshua's conquest of Canaan, there is almost no evidence at all that supports any aspect of those accounts, and there should be. And so those two can be shown to be very doubtful. Okay? But the other reason this is important is that there's actually a prophecy connected to this story in 2 Kings. And that prophecy is in Isaiah chapter 39, verses 5 through 7. Okay? And the passage itself, as well as some historical accounts in Isaiah, were lifted directly from 2 Kings. I'll tell you what the prophecy says. It says, "Listen to the message from the Lord. The time is coming when everything you have, all the treasure stored up by your ancestors, will be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will be left, says the Lord. Some of your own descendants will be taken away into exile. They will become eunuchs who will serve at the palace of Babylon's king." Okay. Now that, at first glance, that appears to be a fairly accurate prophecy of the fall of Jerusalem and then the subsequent Babylonian captivity. But if we look a little bit further into this, there's plenty of evidence that it's not a prophecy, but it's in fact a product of later editing. First of all, the account in Isaiah before that, Isaiah 36 through 39, presents some garbled history concerning the Assyrian siege of Jerusalem, which occurred before the Babylonian siege, the Assyrian king's assassination by his own sons, and then the arrival of the Babylonian envoy to Hezekiah, who was the king that this prophecy was delivered to by Isaiah. Okay. The Babylonian envoy arrived to draw Hezekiah into the rebellion against the Assyrians. Okay. The problem with this account, and again, this was lifted straight out of 2 Kings, it's getting the history exactly backwards. Okay. Now, getting history wrong, it is not exactly consistent with divine authorship here, and so that casts significant doubt on the accuracy of any subsequent prophecy. What it is consistent with is later editing, say sometime after 560 BCE, by a very human and non-divinely inspired author who may have been, by that point, unclear on the exact sequence of events that occurred about 100 years ago. Second, I mentioned that Isaiah copies 2 Kings, okay, and we've already demonstrated that 2 Kings was edited after 560 BCE. And we know that it was copied because both the oracle, that prophecy, and the history were lifted straight out of 2 Kings. And a lot of fundamentalists will assert, well, how do you know that 2 Kings didn't copy Isaiah and not the other way around? And the answer to that is that Isaiah is largely written in poetic language, and 2 Kings is written in prose. In both accounts, they're written in prose, and the style that we see written in Isaiah is in the same style as in 2 Kings. So what you see in Isaiah was lifted from 2 Kings and not the other way around.
So let me ask you, how much actual, like, magical stuff goes on in this Book of Kings?
Well, in this particular account, not too much. I mean, you've got some
so
prophecies.
So there's some very uninteresting stuff going on. I mean, interesting from a historical point of view, but what makes it interesting to somebody who wants to believe in God, for instance, is that they would point to the part of Isaiah that says that it was predicted, and they would say, look at how accurately this one part of the book predicts this other part of the book.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, you as you've just pointed out, that other part of the book which was supposedly predicted can't be just dismissed as never having happened or just part of a story. But there were editors who were free to shuffle the books around as much as they wanted in order to make it appear that Isaiah had been written earlier than it actually was.
Yes.
Okay.
And the other thing it does is that if, in the case of Isaiah, we have a portion of Isaiah lifted directly from a text that we know is edited much later than the events that it supposedly prophesies. If we have a so-called prophecy that does that, it really casts serious doubt on any of the other prophecies in Isaiah. It goes to, you know, the credibility of the witness here. How credible is Isaiah now as a prophet of God if he not only didn't get the prophecy as a prophecy, it was sort of recorded after the fact, but also he garbled the history. I mean, you would think that a God who is capable of inspiring an accurate prophecy would be capable of inspiring accurate history, since that was something, you know, that was supposedly already known. Mm-hmm. So, anyway, hopefully I've succeeded in robbing someone of their faith by giving them evidence that, you know, they don't have to have faith that this story in 2 Kings is true, because now you know that there's actually historical evidence for it.
Right, and when somebody asks, what would it take to convince you of so-and-so?
Well, there you go.
The point being that there are standards that
exactly
they have to meet. And, you know, even if a certain part of a story is true, it doesn't mean that we automatically accept the entire story as true. I mean, point I like to bring up is that in Homer's stories, the Iliad and the Odyssey, a lot of the stuff that he writes about is about wars that we think probably really happened. Sure. But when he says that you know, what was it, Circe turned men into pigs and Zeus came down and messed around with things, we're free not to believe that stuff because it doesn't have the same kind of historical evidence.
And actually, now that you mention it, there was actually a so-called supernatural event that was presented earlier in 2 Kings and in Isaiah, and it concerned the Assyrians and the Assyrian army. Supposedly God sent a plague that wiped out you know, a big chunk of the Assyrian army. Well, there's actually no evidence to support that. So there's nothing much we can say about that because we don't have any evidence that anything bad happened to the Assyrian army.
Okay.
So they could have had some kind of illness and a bunch of them died, and that's why, they eventually lost, but we don't know that for sure.
And it would be irresponsible of us to make up an explanation and say this is definitely what happened. But at the same time, we don't have to say, well, we don't know what happened. It must be what it says in the Bible.
But the other point is that even if we could document that there was some kind of illness that swept through the Assyrian army at about that time, that actually can have a very natural explanation, and there's no reason to posit a supernatural cause for that. Disease was fairly common in armies throughout history, so that would be a perfectly ordinary claim to make.
Okay.
So anyway, that's what I have today. Hopefully that was interesting.
All right.
And I guess we can get to callers here.
Thanks. Time to start with calls. And actually, it looks like quite a few theist callers are lined up today.
Very good.
That's good news. So we're going to start with Bill from Boston, Massachusetts. How are you, Bill?
Good. How are you?
I'm fine.
Good.
So I wanted to start with a question. What type of coffee do atheists like to drink?
Whatever they want.
Yeah.
The reason I ask this is I actually have a few friends that host a radio program or internet program called We Still Believe, and you can find out about it at westillbelieve.org.
Okay.
And they have a challenge to atheists where if you call in and debate them a little bit or ask questions about God, they'll give you a $5 gift card to a coffee shop. So I thought I'd plug that real quick.
Okay. Well.
That's a very generous offer. Mm-hmm. Are they that desperate for callers? Because people call us all the time without us giving them free prizes.
Yeah.
It's kind of a new show, so.
Okay. Well,
okay.
I mean, best of luck to them.
All right. So I have what I believe is proof for the existence of God.
Okay.
Okay.
And my proof is that on October 13th of 1917, there was a documented miracle where, in front of 30,000 people, God moved the sun.
So you're talking about the
Fatima
Miracle of the sun, which you can look up on Wikipedia, right?
That's correct, and other sources as well, yes.
Tell me how you know that these 30,000 people saw this thing. I mean, where did you hear about this?
Well, according to what I've read about it, it was documented in the newspapers of the time. And,
okay.
Yeah, there was a...
Okay, talk about what supposedly happened here.
So there was 3, I think, children. My facts are sketching my brain at the moment, but so there was 3 girls here that predicted that there was going to be a miracle on this day, and there was rain, and a bunch of people showed up at the supposed location, and all of a sudden the rain stopped, the sun came out, and moved in like a zigzag pattern, and all of the clothes of the witnesses were tied, and like I said, it was also reported in the newspapers.
Which newspapers?
So the newspaper I know about is the Portuguese newspaper O Século.
Okay. This is the first I've heard of this thing happening. So the only reason I knew to look it up on Wikipedia was because the call screeners kindly put it up right before. I found a number of interesting sites that people can take a look at where they point out that a lot of the reports that supposedly came from these 30,000 people seeing the same thing actually only sort of came together after a particular priest who claimed to have interviewed a whole bunch of the subjects put this stuff all together. So there's sort of the lack of actual corroboration among these supposedly hundreds of tens of thousands of people who actually saw it. There is there's like one picture, one black and white picture from the event that shows basically a sun shining through some clouds. So not very good photographic evidence that this sort of stuff happened. And there's, this claim that a bunch of children claimed they would see a miracle, which, I don't know how much time you spent talking to children, but not everything they say is particularly accurate all the time.
Yeah.
And I found this kind of amusing thing that states, woe unto Catholics, Our Lady of Fatima is a dirty satanic hoax perpetrated by the Catholic religion. So there's some dispute among other Christians who apparently aren't keen on the fact that this was used as an excuse for idol worship. Not that I care about what Christians think about each other. I just thought that was kind of funny. And I'm a fan of the Skeptics Dictionary, and I wish that I had had time to thoroughly read what they had to say about it, but at skepdic, skepdic.com/refuge/funk13.html, they have a few words to say on that. Other than that, I mean, I can't do thorough research just while I'm sitting here, but I would have to say that even if the rain had stopped and people found that their clothes were drier than they would have expected, what was the point there? I mean, what message would God have been trying to convey at that point?
I'm not quite sure.
Well, I mean...
He's God, I don't know.
Right. I mean, that's the problem. When something happens that's unexplained, that means that a thing happened that people haven't been able to explain. But just like I was saying before about Jen's Bible passages, that doesn't mean that we jump to the conclusion that the fantasy story about, oh, God did some magic and that's why it happened, has to be assumed true by default. You see what I'm saying?
So I do. I mean, I tend to believe it because they, predicted it in advance.
How do you know that they predicted it in advance?
How do you know that?
Just based on what I've read.
Okay, and
I mean, that a lot of people showed up, I'm not sure if they were expecting a miracle or wanted to ridicule the girls after it didn't happen.
Well, my guess is that...
a lot of people showed up looking for something.
Yeah, my guess is that a lot of people came in and, showed up expecting to see something. And when you have people emotionally primed to see something, a lot of times they will see something. And they will see something that isn't necessarily real, but is, basically what they've been primed to see. This is well documented. It's sort of it's a kind of mass hysteria that goes on. And some people, especially those who've been indoctrinated to believe religious claims, are especially susceptible to these kinds of suggestions. It's happened in Mexico before. It's happened in places all over the world where people have said, oh, you're going to witness a miracle. And they show up expecting to see a miracle, and, they do. But it didn't really happen.
Okay.
All right.
I mean, I'll certainly look at the arguments against it or what skeptics have to say about it. I mean, I am a theist, but I honestly, I am open to persuasion.
So is this the thing that convinces you that God is real?
Well, I mean, I was raised Christian. I'm a Roman Catholic, and I kind of at the beginning, maybe for the first 20 or so odd years, I'm like 27 now. I didn't really question the existence of God, and then when I listen to this program and I read things online, I looked for something that confirmed God exists, and this was something that was brought to my attention.
Well, if I were looking for confirmation that there were an all-powerful being who created everything and answers prayers and takes an individual interest in every single person on earth and their lives and issues these orders, I would be looking for something a lot stronger and more direct than the kinds of things that happen that that are either, I mean, they're so rare that we can only point to something that is poorly documented and have happened a long time ago, as opposed to them happening all the time. And so they become impossible to confirm, or they're so mundane that people could interpret them as not something from God. As, for instance, we hear sometimes from people saying things like, oh, I prayed to God because my car keys were missing, and then I found my car keys. It's not that we're opposed to being introduced to evidence that there's an ongoing presence of God in the universe. It's just that, we're inclined to be especially skeptical about unusual claims, which doesn't mean that they can't be shown. It just means that the standards of evidence, that the corroboration needs to be at least as good as what Jen was just showing as evidence that Nebuchadnezzar was real. And we don't even have that, is the problem.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll let you guys get on to some other callers. I appreciate the time.
All right.
Thank
You
you.
very much for calling.
Bye.
So next we have Jacob from Lafayette, Los Angeles, and that's
Louisiana.
on the line. Oh,
Lafayette,
sorry.
Louisiana. Yeah.
That wouldn't be right. L.A.
Yeah.
Louisiana, line 4. There you are. Okay. Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Russell on the right, correct?
Am I? It's turned around. Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm not sure your name on the left. What's your name?
Jen.
Okay. I was just wondering what your reasons are for believing in God.
For not believing in God?
Yes.
Lack of evidence?
Okay, but I mean, have you considered the consequences if you're wrong?
Have you ever heard of something called Pascal's wager?
No.
Oh, well, you should probably research that.
Because that's what you're trying to introduce here.
Okay.
So, what are the consequences if we're wrong, may I ask?
Well, if you're wrong, then you go to hell, and if you're not, if you choose not to believe in God, and you're wrong, then you go to hell. But you could just choose to believe in God, and if you're not wrong, then you go to heaven.
Okay,
Well,
let me correct you on something, okay? I don't choose to not believe in God, okay? Belief is not a choice, okay? It's not that I don't want to believe in God or that I choose not to. It's that I don't believe in God. And I don't believe because no one has ever presented sufficient evidence. And every piece of evidence I've examined leads me to the conclusion that most likely no God exists.
Okay.
Let me ask you something, though. Are you a Muslim?
No.
Why
I'm
not?
a Christian.
Yeah, why are you not a Muslim?
Well, I'm a Roman Catholic.
Well, have you considered the possibility that you might be wrong about that? Just wondering.
Well, I've considered it, but I mean, I've done my research and I've read the Bible.
So you don't think it's likely that Islam is true, but there could be a possibility that you're wrong, right?
Well, there's the possibility, but
Okay, so, I mean, just think about the consequences if you were wrong about that. I mean, Allah had no son, supposedly, and, above all, he hates idolaters. And if you live your life being a Christian and then it turns out that Islam was correct, aren't you going to be in big trouble?
well, doesn't Allah hate Israel as well?
So?
Yeah.
I mean,
But
I
according to
don't
the Bible,
think that's
the
specifically
chosen,
mentioned.
That's God's chosen nation.
Well, according to you, if your beliefs are correct. But if it turns out that Islam is correct, then you're in for a lot of hell, aren't you?
Well, the Quran is based off of the Bible, right?
The Quran,
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
in the same sense that the Bible is based on the Torah.
Yeah.
Right, but in the Bible and in the Torah, it says that Israel is God's chosen nation.
Yeah, but the Torah doesn't mention anything about hell. So if
Yeah.
I'm wrong in that direction, there isn't even a Jewish hell. So, if it turns out that you're wrong and Judaism is correct, then I actually haven't risked any hell.
Well, have you read the Bible?
Yep.
Of course.
Have you read Genesis?
Yep.
Of course.
Okay, well, the Bible talks about beginning of the universe. It talks about the history of the earth.
Sure, it says a
Yeah.
lot of
Science
wrong
can't answer
things
these
about
questions.
the way the universe started, but
Yeah.
so what?
Well, science can't answer these questions.
What?
What questions?
Like where the universe came from and the history
Okay,
of the earth.
first of all, assuming that that's correct, assuming that science can't ever answer those questions, what makes you think that inserting a God, for which there is no evidence at all, is a better answer?
Wait, repeat that?
Assuming for a minute that science can never answer any of these questions, that science just, it never will have the answer, okay? What makes you think inserting a God in there as an explanation is a better answer?
Well, I'm not just inserting it. It's a book we've had since the beginning of time.
No,
we
it
haven't.
isn't.
I mean, look, wait. Actually, let me ask you: how old
Okay.
how long do you think the universe has been around?
For as long as the Bible says.
Which is?
Which is, yeah.
Well, I'm not really. Some people say it's 6,000. Some people say it's 10,000. And I mean, I don't really.
So
I don't
so
really
you're a
know.
young earther.
Uh,
If
Well,
I
like
said actually the universe has been around for about 13.5 billion years, you'd say that's crazy. You're just worshiping science, right?
no, I wouldn't say that. I'm saying I don't know. I don't know how.
Okay,
and I
so
don't
so
claim
you
to.
wouldn't it wouldn't be accurate to say that the Bible was around 13.5 billion years ago, right?
Well, I mean, the first 7 days, or the first 3 days, the sun wasn't created yet, so those 3 days lasted.
You realize that the answers that science has come up with for how long it took the sun and the earth to form were a lot longer than 3 days, right? I mean, you can either go with the Bible on this or you can go with science on this, but science didn't conclude that the earth is 6,000 or 10,000 years, or that the sun and the earth were made in 3 days.
Right, but it doesn't have an explanation for how everything got here to begin with.
And neither does the Bible.
Right.
Wait, what'd you say?
I said neither does the Bible.
Well, yes, it does. It explains that a God created everything.
It
And-
explains at least some of it wrong,
Yeah, it gets it wrong.
and it says a bunch of other stuff that we have no particular reason to believe. And your only argument coming into this was consider what happens if I'm right, which is silly because there are all kinds of fantasy scenarios that we could make up, like, if you don't watch the Atheist Experience every week without fail, then a hammer will fall on your head and kill you. But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that people should watch the Atheist Experience just because they're scared of something they have no reason to think might be true.
Well, you have a book that's been around since the beginning of mankind.
But it hasn't.
I mean, you call here and you ask us if we've read the Bible, and clearly you haven't even studied how the Bible was compiled and the history of these books. I mean, seriously, since the beginning of mankind? I mean, we have historical records that we can
Have you ever
we
heard
can
of
date
Chinese
civilizations back
dynasties?
beyond 6,000 years.
Well, I'm not saying the universe is 6,000 years old.
Okay,
Well, so
but
how old are you saying it is?
I already told you I don't know. I'm not claiming to know that.
Well, then, if you say that you don't know, even though you say the Bible says a date between 6 and 10,000 years old, but you're saying that you don't know, okay? What's wrong with saying I don't know for other big questions?
Well, the consequences of,
What consequences?
of being wrong.
So what if you're
we
wrong?
should be Muslims then?
Well, because I already told you I am more convinced by the Christian Bible than by
So
the
we should
by the
just
Quran.
believe you and not the other people because you said so.
Yeah.
No, I'm not saying you should believe me just because I said so. I'm asking why you don't believe in one of them or one that convinces you.
Because
You
there's
know,
not a
just-
good reason to.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I wasn't trying to convert you. I just really wanted to know
Okay.
why y'all did.
Well, now you know.
Okay.
And knowing is half the battle.
Yes.
Vaughn from Houston. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, I was on the show a few weeks ago.
Yeah?
Yeah. Russell, you remember me, right?
Yeah, I mean, you sound familiar. Remind me what we talked about real quick.
I was talking about man, there's an echo. That's annoying the crap out of me. But
Sorry.
I was talking about the, what's it called? The anthropic principle and so forth.
Right,
maybe
okay.
maybe a quote-unquote designer universe. And then I got cut off, not by y'all, but just lost connection.
Oh, yeah, okay, I remember now.
Anyways, I'll talk about what I want to talk about in just a second. But we're going to go ahead and comment on the last caller. It seemed as though, I wasn't listening too closely, but it seemed as though y'all were implying that the Bible necessarily states that the universe is 6,000 to 10,000 years old.
No, that's what he says. That it says.
Oh, okay, but y'all, I don't. As far as I remember, y'all didn't.
I will agree that if you're someone like Hugh Ross, who I think you brought up last time, you can.
No, hey, well, I didn't. I said I didn't respect Hugh Ross that much myself.
Okay,
so.
but I mean, you mentioned him, and he's actually a good example of somebody who can stretch a point and say, well, when they said day, they didn't really mean day; they meant period of time. And a lot of people legitimately believe that God exists, and the Bible is sort of accurate, and day really means long period of time, and therefore
Right.
they accept the scientific answer. So yeah,
Right.
I wouldn't say that you have to be a young earther.
Right. Okay. I just got to throw that out first.
Okay.
Anyways, second of all, another guy commented on this, and he was throwing out that Pascal wagers bull. And I would also like to ask the same question, but then elaborate on it. What specific reason do you have to believe that God does not exist?
The same as the reason you have to believe that the tooth fairy does not exist.
Okay.
I mean, you don't go like launching a full-out investigation about whether there's a tooth fairy because there's no particular good reason proposed. I mean, other than what your parents say when you're young and gullible.
Yeah.
There's no. I mean, it's like the tooth fairy could exist, but the person who is claiming that the tooth fairy exists would have to bring the evidence that there is one.
Okay, now I would agree with you on that, but if I remember correctly, at the beginning of the show, y'all said that the show supports positive atheism. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You and I did a show about that.
Yeah.
And on popular, or I shouldn't say popular, official definition is that positive atheism is a positive belief that no God exists.
I don't think that's.
Sorry?
I think Jen and I actually disagree on what that. What it's meant to mean.
On the very website that you and Matt Dillahunty started, that's exactly how it defines it.
Well, we didn't start it, but does it?
It
When
probably does. The positive atheism.
Okay, go ahead.
What it means is that the statement that some God exists is false. If you believe that the statement "some God exists" is a false statement, that's a positive atheist. Okay.
Right. Now, as far as I'm aware, though, positive atheism, strong atheism, etc., is actually a claim to knowledge, though. It's not simply a lack of belief; it's a positive belief.
It's an affirmative belief, but it's not necessarily a claim to knowledge.
Well, a positive belief in itself is a claim to knowledge that the statement is false.
I actually want to break in here. I
Okay.
mean, I know we disagreed about this last time, but what my familiarity with the slogan of the Atheist Community of Austin is that when we originally started saying promoting positive atheism, we meant in a positive way. Getting out there, talking to people, being friendly, engaging people. So
I can respect that. Well, here in front of the audience that we're watching here, I'd just like to know, are y'all personally strong atheists or weak atheists?
I'm a strong atheist.
I consider myself a weakish atheist.
Okay, so perhaps I'll just pose this question to Jen, since he's a weak atheist. You know, I asked previously, what reason do you have that God does not exist? Because you do have a positive belief that God does not exist. Absence of evidence would not be evidence of absence.
Yes, it is. If it should
Okay.
be there. If the
Okay,
evidence
now-
should be there, it is evidence of absence.
If the evidence should be there, precisely. So the absence of evidence is only evidence of absence in cases where the entity, in this case God, we should expect to have some evidence.
Right.
Now, evidence itself is, subjective, though. So, and we
Really?
can only say that we don't have it. Well, yeah, precisely it is, because one person could say that I see the universe itself as evident, and you could say I don't see that at all because I want to see empirical evidence. I want to see God walk on water in front of me.
Well, I'm not
So
asking for
absolutely
that.
it's subjective. I know, I'm just getting across the point that it's subjective.
And I disagree with that because I just gave an example of evidence and how to use evidence to validate a claim.
Oh, did you give that on the previous call, or did you give that on me?
I gave that in the introduction of this show, how to use evidence to validate a claim in the Bible specifically.
Well, I think the Bible is from a historical standpoint, though. So I think there's different, there's different spectrums in terms of historical accuracy and actual.
Did you watch?
Claims.
Did you watch the introduction to the show?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Okay. Well, I actually went through an entire example of how to validate some historical event in the Bible, and I used an example of the fall of Jerusalem and the Babylonian captivity.
Okay. I can't. I'm not going to go ahead and make you go over that because I'm
Right.
sure that takes a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if we go ahead and say absence of evidence is evidence of absence, which I would disagree.
In
but
some
if
cases, it is.
No doubt that some people think it is, but if it is, then we have to agree on two things. Number one is that God, if he does exist, has not met his burden of evidence. Number two,
Okay, we agree.
we have,
Yeah.
well, I think we can go back to that in a second, but number two is that we have, with high probability of a surety, that we have surveyed the whole area in which existence might be probable. And it's clearly that we have not, because it's just in the last 50 years, we've gotten a supposed,
So let me ask you, if we've only, suppose, for instance, that we had only surveyed, let's say, let's keep it modest, let's say Los Angeles. Let's say we have done a thorough search of God we have done a thorough search for God in Los Angeles and nowhere else. And we find not a trace of him. Would the explanation for that be that actually God is present everywhere except Los Angeles? I mean, the notion that God is sort of omnipresent kind of goes hand in hand with the idea that you'd have to have some kind of ongoing indication of his presence in any particular place.
Well, here's two things, though.
And I mean, given that our knowledge is limited to the earth, especially since Christians tend to claim that the earth is of special interest to God, it would be kind of odd to try to make the case that, well, we haven't found any evidence of God here on earth, but maybe he's just everywhere in the rest of the universe, and kind of, there's a godless bubble around earth somewhere.
Right. Now, I understand what you're saying, but it seems like you're looking at it from a specifically naturalistic point of view.
Well, what other?
Well, hold on. Well, you're looking at it empirically, where you're saying, theoretically, if you lived in Los Angeles, I don't see God. But by God's very definition, he's immaterial. He would not be a material being within Los Angeles.
So
when
you...
I make... Sorry. Can I continue that real quick?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. So when I talk about surveying the possible field of evidence, that's not necessarily, I'm talking about materially within my room, within my city, within my world.
Mm-hmm.
I'm speaking of, and clearly y'all embrace science, I'm speaking of perhaps future, physics discovery, mathematical discoveries. For example, in astrophysics, it's become commonplace for most physics today to postulate the early inflationary area of the expansion of the universe after the Big Bang, right? There is absolutely no evidence
I'm not a
for that.
cosmologist.
There's absolutely no evidence for that, but it's absurd to think that absence of evidence means that that early inflationary area did not happen.
We're not in the fields that you're talking about,
Yeah.
but if you're going to claim that that scientists have come up with something that they are absolutely certain about and they have no evidence for it, I am going to say you're probably wrong.
Yeah, I would consider that an extraordinary claim.
Yeah,
Oh, wait,
I
I'm sorry,
think
can you
that
repeat that again?
think that you're most likely not comprehending the science, and either
Yeah.
the claims are not as widely universally accepted as you're saying, or the evidence is better than you're leading us to believe.
No, what I just said. No, that's
Okay.
you know, that if you look more into it, it absolutely is. If you look at from evolution, there's certain time periods when there are no fossils. It's absurd to think that the absence of evidence for those fossils means that there are no fossils.
That's irrelevant. I mean,
I would think it's absolutely relevant.
what I mean, first of all, if Jen asserts a belief that there is no God, that doesn't mean absolute certainty that there is no God. Am I right?
Right.
I mean, there is no. That's an important thing about science in general, is that there is no generally stated absolute, positive, 100% certainty about it. There's only, let's take all the evidence, weigh it up, and what does it best support? And then they tend to go along with the thing that is best supported. So in the case of, is there God or is there no God? If there's a complete lack of evidence, you're right. That doesn't mean that there is absolutely, with beyond a shadow of a doubt, no God. But you can at least say with confidence, if you're a strong atheist, that given what I know now, I have no good reason to believe in God, and therefore I will assume that there is not until new evidence comes up, because otherwise I would be jumping to a positive conclusion without justification.
But you said until new evidence comes up, and you previously stated that we do not know with absolute 100% certainty.
Exactly.
That's correct.
That would imply weak atheism, where
No, it doesn't.
You cannot prove that God does not exist.
Strong
You gotta-
atheism
And
isn't
you are
certainty.
not certain, but you believe he does not.
Strong atheism does not imply any certainty, okay? And this is something that, I almost never hear this from atheists. It's almost always theists who are going on and on about 100% certainty, okay?
No, I think 100%
Stop.
certainty is.
Stop, okay? Doubt is a reality. It's something we have to deal with in life, okay? I'm not uncomfortable with being uncertain about things. I deal with it in my professional life all the time. Uncertainty is fine. And I can still come up with what I believe to be the best answer to a question, even if I have some degree of uncertainty. And that's all I'm doing here. I'm not saying that I'm 100% certain that no God exists. What I'm saying is I believe, based on the evidence I've been presented, that no God exists. And there's a distinct difference between claiming absolute certainty there and saying, based on the evidence I've seen, no God exists.
Okay.
We've only got 5 minutes left in the show.
Can I make one last statement?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, and she was saying with the evidence that is given. Now, clearly some people find certain evidence as convincing, and it seems as though the evidence that I would find convincing is empirical. That you want. Now, what would you define as evidence?
Well,
I think we've already talked about that.
Yeah, we've talked about that at the beginning of the show.
We've
what
only
would
got.
you personally want to see? Not evidence that the biblical assertions are true. That, forget about all religions, that a deity exists. What evidence would you like to see?
Okay, are you claiming that your God is omnipresent?
I am claiming that my God is immaterial, infinite, and morally righteous.
Okay, does this God want a personal relationship with humans?
I would say that, sure, why not?
Okay, then if you have a God like that exists, then this God would presumably know exactly what it would take to convince me and would present me with that evidence.
Okay.
I'm going to go with, actually, my version is that here's something that would easily convince me, or fairly easily convince me. In The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the Vogons, in announcing that they were about to destroy the Earth, did a worldwide broadcast where every single TV spontaneously came on. Every pool of water, everything that could convey an image, suddenly displayed the Vogons, and they explained exactly what they wanted, and it was repeatable among everybody. So I would say that if God could be as good as a Vogon, that would do it for me.
Yeah, that would actually be pretty cool.
It would be pretty cool. But I want to take one last call, and you're welcome to call back next week. I'm sorry. We can't hang on to you just because you really, really want me to. Yeah. But, I mean, you know, I wanted to give you as long as possible. We're going to bring this show down with an actual atheist caller. Okay. Even though, believe it or not, we had the option of just filling it with wall-to-wall theists today. Okay. So the control room is telling me that this is pronounced Miryam in San Francisco. Say that again.
Miryam.
Okay.
Miryam, okay.
Just, you got 3 minutes, and I'm sorry, we'll take you after the break.
Okay, I'll be really quick. Basically, I have a very fundamentalist Christian sister, and I love her. We come from a very close Hispanic family, and it's just one of those situations where it's hard to be with each other because even though she loves me, sometimes she'll make comments, like, for example, towards a boyfriend, saying, how can he overcome that you're an atheist? Isn't he afraid that he's condemning his immortal soul to hell by dating you? Things like that. I mean, it's hard to be around someone who makes comments like that, even though I really love her. And I actually got a good laugh about that one when she said it.
Have you talked to her about this?
Yeah, I mean, I have, but it's like, because it's hard because it's almost like she doesn't want to be hurtful, but
can't help
her
it.
beliefs
she just
and
keeps
everything,
doing
it makes her.
I mean, you know, basically, this is pretty disrespectful of you, and I think that, you know, it's probably worth having another conversation and pointing out to her how disrespectful this is, and that you're not doing the same thing to her. You know, you're not saying, oh, you know, how can you go to church? How can you believe this? I assume that you're not doing that anyway.
I mean, I'm pretty vocal about what I think, but I'm trying to have a better relationship with her just because I have a nephew and I want to be in his life and I don't want her to feel like she's going to have to withhold.
Real quick, I want to get something out before we run out of time, but if you'd hang on, we can talk to you a little bit after the show. I was listening to Savage Love podcast the other day, and he was talking to a caller who was trying to come out to her family as gay. And what he said to her was basically, go ahead, tell him, it won't get any easier, and then give it a year for you to squabble and fight, and see if things are better in a year. They often are, but if they're not, then you have a little more information to know whether this is a viable relationship to keep up. Okay, we're out of time. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Hang on.